At the age of nearly 92 years old, he alone survives. Charles Carroll of Carrollton was the oldest and the longest surviving signer of the Declaration of Independence.
Charles Carroll of Carrollton.
Charles Carroll of Carrollton.
Charles Carroll of Carrollton.
Charles Carroll was born on September 8, 1737 in Annapolis, Maryland. His surname of Carrollton comes from his father's 10,000-acre estate in his home state. Charles's father was a wealthy planter and was well able to afford to send young Charles to get a European education, which was much better than the domestic options at the time. So, at the age of 8 years old, Charles set off for France and wasn't to return until 1764, 2 decades after he had left. Just being a child when he left, the man who would return would be barely recognizable from his younger self, as he has become now a well-studied, honorable man from his European adventures. On October 14, 1774, a ship arrived in the port of Annapolis containing tea, which was not known to the captain until after they had left London. Well, since the colonies were boycotting tea in response to the Townshend Act, this was met with public outcry at their arrival here. Well, having made the trip late in the year, sending the ship back wasn't even an option, since there were 53 indentured servants on board, and there was a good chance that they probably wouldn't make it back to London safely through the autumn storms. Charles was called to help negotiate a compromise between the outraged mob, the owner of the ship, and the crew that was on board. Well, the only solution that Charles could see was to have the owner pay the tea tax himself, offload the crew and the cargo other than the tea, and then set the ship ablaze with the controversial cargo. Since this was a better option than losing the cargo and the crew to the sea, on October 19, 1774, just 5 days after arriving in port, that is exactly what they did. Although Charles never intended in pursuing a career in politics, he was chosen to be part of the Continental Congress, representing his state of Maryland on July 4, 1776, and was able to sign the document that same day at the age of 38. After signing his name Charles Carroll, another delegate pointed out that King George wouldn't be able to tell which Charles Carroll had actually been the one to sign the document, since it was a fairly common name at the time. Well, noting this, Charles returned to the document and added "of Carrollton" to firmly establish his identity and prove his devotion to this cause. Well, Charles went on to serve as a senator for Maryland from 1789 to 1791, at which point he joined his state senate to focus on the issues that were a little closer to home. He would go on to serve in that role until 1804, when he retired at the age of 66. Since Reverend Charles Augustus Goodrich was publishing his book in 1829, Mr. Carroll was still alive at the time of the writing. Mr. Goodrich had this to say about the surviving signer. At the age of nearly 92 years old, he alone survives. He seems an aged oak standing alone on the plain, which time has spared a little longer, after all its contemporaries have been leveled to the dust. Sole survivor of an assembly of as great of men as the world has witnessed, in a transaction, one of the most important that history records. What thoughts, what reflections must at time fill his soul. Interesting relic of the past, Too few men has it been permitted to number so many years, to none to have filled them up more honorably and usefully than Charles Carroll. Charles Carroll would survive just 3 years after the publishing of Reverend Goodrich's book, finally passing away on November 14th, 1832, at the age of 95. The end.